Bacati Productions present an original Star Wars story, Legacy's Edge, Division, written by Gregory O. Scott. Chapter 1. I wish I were going with you, Rome said, and Vitor didn't doubt it. What he heard in his brother's voice echoed in the Force, concern, impatience, and envy most of all. Vitor forced a smile and said, "If it's the outfit you want, you'll get yours soon enough." They stood in his quarters inside the Imperial Knight Academy on Bastion. The floor-to-ceiling mirror on the north wall displayed Vitor in his newest raiment. Scarlet plasteel plates protected his shoulders and torso. Layered gloves, the same brilliant red, encased his hands. Insulated but flexible fiber mesh protected the rest of his body. This was the newly drawn garb of their father's elite protectors, the Imperial Knights. Frankly, Vitor wasn't crazy about it. I looked good on parade, especially with that optional cape, but the red seemed ostentatious, not to mention a tempting target on the battlefield. But it wasn't the outfit Ron envied. The younger brother was 12 years old, and while he'd experienced more combat training than any boy should, he wasn't ready for war yet. Vitor was 5 years older and had already killed Sith during the attack on the Academy 3 years ago. Now Vitor, officially knighted, was going off to battle. "I'm sure you'll be able to break the siege," Ron told him. Like Vitor, he was looking in the mirror at that resplendent reflection. "I'm just one knight," he'd almost said, just one Jedi. But they weren't Jedi anymore. They were something different and he was still getting used to it. "You're not just a knight. You have the Force with you," Ron said. He actually seemed to believe it. Vitor was only 17, but he envied his brother's youthful conviction. "The Force is nice," Vitor agreed, "but they've been holding Endex for over a month. It's going to take a lot of fighting, a lot of killing, to kick them out." Ron's eyes narrowed. "It's what we have to do." It was. In this battle for the Empire's future, thousands had already died. Their father, self-proclaimed emperor, controlled most Imperial territory, but Corrine Veers and his so-called restorationists had fortified the Velkar sector. It was a brutal fight for every planet. "I know you're worried, but you'll have Master Tori with you," Ron said hopefully. "He'll keep you safe." "It's not him I'm concerned about." Vitor allowed a smile. He'd not trained much under the man, but Aiden Tori had a reputation as one of the Imperial Knight's best. Like their mother, he'd been a respected Jedi long before the Civil War started. "Father says we have to do this," Ron told him. "We belong on the front lines. That's our duty as princes, as knights." He'd almost said Jedi too. "I know what our duty is." Vitor picked his weapon off the dresser. The lightsaber had a smooth silver hilt. When he thumped the button, a pure white blade extended. To foster unity among their newborn order, it had been decided that all their lightsabers should be identical. Nonetheless, Vitor felt personally attuned to his. After all, he'd already taken a life with it. He could still picture, when he closed his eyes, the slack face of the young Sith woman he'd slain. In death she hadn't looked evil at all. He'd do more killing on Endex, and those people would be soldiers of the Empire, just like him. Not evil men, just ones misled by Veer's false promises. Vitor wanted to share these doubts with his brother, but Ron was too young. His world was too simple. He wished their cousin Marin was here. She was the same age as Vitor, and they'd grown up close as siblings, but she'd followed her father off to Ossus. He hadn't seen her in 3 years. Bastion still felt hollow without her. His maudlin thoughts were interrupted by a buzz from his door. "Come in," Vitor called. The door opened to reveal another scarlet body. Despite the regal armor, Aiden Tori had a good-humored, relaxed smile on his face as he walked into the room. He looked at Ron and asked, "Do we have a late addition to the roster?" "No," Ron said, slightly sour. "I'm not ready to fight." "Yet?" "You will be?" "All too soon." Tori crossed arms. "Hopefully, when the time comes, this fight will be over. Our father says if we take Endex, we can move on Entrala. And if we can take Entrala, we can end it all. Don't get ahead of yourselves. Endex is a stepping stone. Entrala will be an even harder fight, and there's no guarantee we'll end the war even there." Tori exhaled. "But we've got to start somewhere. Are you ready?" Vitor, you look ready. He glanced at his scarlet reflection once more. I've got my kit packed, Master. I've got my armor. Unless I forgot something, I'm good to transfer to Night Watch. Tori looked him over and tapped a thoughtful finger on his chin. The older knight's short dark beard had a few curls of gray. You look ready, but you don't feel ready. Vitor paled. I am. This is my duty. This is what I've been trained for. I'm prepared to fight. Nobody's ever prepared to fight. Accepting that is the first part of being prepared. That doesn't make sense. Roan frowned. Tori smirked. We may not be Jedi anymore, but doesn't mean we can't toss out cryptic riddles now and then. The point is, you can never predict the future, especially when you're going into something as dangerous and chaotic as a battle. But the battle has a flow to it, just like the Force. The best way to stay alive is to calm yourself, find that flow, and allow yourself to move with it. Vitor thought back to his only previous life or death battle. He fought to save himself, his friends, his old grandmother Jaina. That rainy night was like a blurred dream now, not even real. But he'd fought, killed, and survived. The Force had been with him. He'd moved with the flow, somehow. It's a difficult current, Tori said, but you'll never learn to swim unless you jump in. He stepped closer and put a hand on Vitor's shoulder plate. Don't worry. I'll be with you to make sure you don't drown. I know. Vitor aroused a smile, but it wilted. Isn't Index a desert world? Tori shrugged. It was just a metaphor. Anyway, Night Watch awaits, and Index needs us. Once we're en route, you'll have plenty of time to prepare yourself mentally. Of course. Thank you, Master. Vitor looked back at his brother. They'd never been the hugging kind. Vitor merely extended a red-gloved hand and said, May the Force be with you. I'll be sitting around. You're the one who's going to need it. Roan shook. His hand was small and bare, but his grip was firm. Then, leaving his brother behind, the Prince of the Empire left his home. The Grand Mesa of Endex was a geological marvel. It emerged from the red-brown earth in ascending tiers, rising 4 kilometers above the surrounding desert on its highest point. Shaped in a rugged oval, it stretched 12 kilometers at its longest point. Its flanks were colossal rugged staircases with straight fall cliffs hundreds of meters tall, separating levels. The highest stage of the mesa now bristled with machinery, a shield projector, communications arrays, ion cannons, and 10 heavy anti-orbital turbolaser batteries primed to defend the shipyards and geosynchronous drift directly above. It was one of the most secure fortresses in Veer's empire. This was their 48th day on the Grand Mesa and their 36th under siege. Nath was keeping count. It had been 4 days since the enemy attacked their position on the mesa's southern side. Mortars from hundreds of meters below arced up to their position. The projectiles were poorly aimed but managed to knock out 2 anti-air batteries and 3 portable web cannons. Others gouged massive, charred holes into bare rock. Nate Karras and the rest of his unit, Squad 12 of the 247th Infantry, took position on the cliff's edge and fired down. The enemy was only specks of black and white against the red of the mesa's lower shelves, but after the initial barrage, they attempted to move on the 247th's position, using fiber cables and jetpacks to ascend the sheer rock. Here they come, lads, called Sergeant Rakil over the squad's group comm. Karras, Kranz, Popper, aim for the ones with the packs. Everybody else, get ready to repel. As half the unit scampered behind cover, Karras and the other 2 troopers remained on their bellies, lying at the edge of the cliff. It was an awkward position. Their armor scraped the rocky earth beneath as they pushed their heads and shoulders over the edge and strained to aim their ERC 990 rifles down without tipping over the edge. The enemy was still specks below, but Nath marked the flare of jetpacks as some began their ascent. Here they come, he called to his companions. I'll take the west formation, Popper said coolly. Karras, take east. Kranz, you've got center. Popper didn't outrank them, but nobody argued. As the flare of jetpacks grew closer and brighter, all 3 troopers began to shoot downward. Nate's rifle reverberated in his hands and the stock knocked the chin of his helmet as he fired repeatedly. His bolt seemed to dwindle to nothing, but one shot clipped an approaching air trooper and sent him crashing into the cliff face. As the jetpack and the trooper exploded, the others continued their ascent, firing skyward. "Stang it!" cried Kranz. "You hit?" asked Nath. He didn't take his eyes off the approaching troops. Skimmed, the other man grunted, but he stopped firing. Nath redoubled his efforts. Another of his shots winged an air trooper. The jetpack sputtered and the soldier fell back down. 4 more were surging toward their position. Popper clipped another and sent him tumbling, but the other 3 were on them, too fast. The trio of attackers surged past their cliff edge. Nath and Popper skirted off the edge, rolled onto their backs, and tried to take aim at the soldiers now above them. The air troopers stopped their ascent and hovered just 5 meters overhead. Nath got his first good look at them. They wore plasteel armor, with black banded helmets to cover their faces. Aside from the jetpacks, it was standard stormtrooper armor, just like his. After 3 years of fighting, Nath was used to it. It had been hard at first, shooting at fellow Imperials, but these weren't real Imperials. These were men who sold their souls to a usurper, and the Jedi puppeteers who'd broken the Empire from within. This war was a tragedy. To lose would be calamity. Nath didn't hesitate. He just fired. His shots, and those from a dozen other troopers on the mesa shelf, chased the flitting, ever-moving air troopers. The enemy didn't return laser fire. Instead, they tossed down grenades that burst in the middle of the camp. At the same time, more mortar fire whistled from below and added another set of vicious explosions. Somebody clipped one air trooper. His jetpack sputtered, and he moved away from their shelf before falling. Whether he made a soft or hard landing below, it didn't matter. The other 2 troopers kept lobbing grenades. Nath thought he got one in the foot, but the troopers kept weaving above them. Then a single blast took him in the chin, burning off the front half of his face. The body went slack, but the jetpack continued to burn, and the corpse went sailing off into the northward sky. Nath, still lying on his back, looked to see Popper. The other man was adjusting his aim. His ERC 990 rocked against his chest as he popped off another precise shot. This one caught the remaining air trooper in his jetpack. The machine exploded, scattering what was left of his rider in pieces across the smoldering camp. Yes, Popper deserved his name. He was the best marksman in the squad, maybe the whole 247. Unfortunately, his great aim wasn't enough. As Sergeant Rikia called for a Citra, more air troopers surged in from below. Worse, Nath saw the black claws of grappling hooks cut into the cliff's edge. "They're coming over," he shouted, too late. Before any of the squads could counter, over a dozen new stormtroopers pulled themselves over the edge. They immediately began firing. Their sergeant now called for them to fall back. Nath cursed, rolled onto his stomach, and pushed himself up. Popper was already on his feet. Kranz stumbled as he rose, and Nath grabbed the other man's arm to pull him straight. "Thanks," Kranz grunted aloud. Then a blaster bolt took him in the back of the head. The body tipped and fell. Nath still gripped his arm, and he almost let himself be dragged to the ground. He stared in shock at the figure slumped beside him like a broken doll. A black scorch marched in the back of his white helmet. A man a second ago, now a corpse. "Come on, kid," Popper growled. As Nath had pulled Kranz, Popper pulled Nath by the arm and dragged him toward the next ascending cliff. They had no choice but to leave Kranz behind. The Restorationist troops defending the Grand Mesa had one advantage over their traitorous enemy. They'd installed repulsor lifts that would easily carry them to next highest tier. Soldiers from the 247th crammed onto each of the 3 lifts. Some stayed behind to cover their comrades' escape. A few hover cars had ascended from the lower tier too, and were deploying more Fel's troops. Popper pulled Nath onto a lift. Their armored bodies cracked against those of the dozen-plus troopers already aboard. The platform immediately shuddered, then rose. Nath was too dosed to fight, but Popper and several others leaned over the edge and shot at the enemy as they ascended. When the repulsor lift reached the next highest tier, the stormtroopers hurried off. Nath and Popper were among them. Even though everyone wore armor, they could still spot Chopper, Corporal Quillick, and Sergeant Rekia. After 37 days on the Grand Mesa, each stormtrooper, on both sides of the fight, had acquired unique dents, scratches, and scorch marks on his armor. "Where's Kranz?" asked Quillick. "Is he with you?" Popper shook his head. "Went down. Head shot." "Damn it all," the corporal growled. Explosions sounded below and rocked the cliff shelf. The 247th had completed its retreat, and with the high ground regained, some troopers were tossing grenades down on the lower shelf. It wouldn't be enough to stop Fel's traitors, but it would slow them down before their next assault. "There's nothing we could do about Kranz," Nate told Rekia. "It happened too fast." "I understand. We'll mourn later. Now let's get new defenses up." He snapped orders, and the survivors of Squad 12 joined the rest of the 247th in deploying new barricades and mortar emplacements. They do their best to hold their tier of barren rock, just like each one below it. And they keep fighting as the traitors chase them higher and higher, to the top of the towering mesa. They keep fighting because they were soldiers of the Empire, and fighting was their fate. The Grand Mesa could have been a tourist attraction empire-wide, but almost a century ago, during the reign of the Pentester alignment, Artis Kane's mining corporations had torn apart the Grand Rock Formation and reaped the heavy metals within. Material from the mines had been shipped into orbit to build Index's shipyards. The Grand Mesa still deserved its name, but it was over a kilometer shorter than it had once been. Because the mesa had been strip-mined and crowned with powerful defense emplacements, the geological marvel had become a prize worth fighting for. Over 37 days, Benson Karas had been doing just that. Endex was Benson's first combat deployment. His unit, the 401st Infantry, had been dropped into the desert 50 kilometers away from the Grand Mesa, then marched beneath the blazing heat and beneath the umbrella of the deflector shield until they reached their target and began the slow, awful ascent up the mesa's south face. Other units were attacking it from other sides, each one struggling step by step to reach the fortress at the top. They'd been making progress, but every step was brutal. Benson's squadron had thankfully missed the worst of today's fighting. The 401 ST's air trooper unit had led the charge. Other squads had mounted the mesa's next tier and chased the restorationist troops up to more levels. When night fell and the desert turned cold, his group lingered on a lower step. They could hear occasional thunder from explosions on higher tiers. Mostly mortars popped off by each side, but there was no immediate threat. They could take off their helmets, sit around the warm glow of a broomstick, and chew their hard, tasteless rations. "You heard the latest rumor?" asked Tinker. "What?" Corporal Vivith replied tiredly. Tinker always had the latest rumor. "I heard we're getting reinforcements," the lean man said. "'Bout bloody time," muttered Neris, squat and ugly. "Not just any reinforcements." Tinker lowered his voice to a tense whisper. "I hear we've got Jedi on the way." If he was hoping for an odd reaction, he didn't get one. "Imperial Knights?" Vivith corrected. "And we've heard that one before." "Well, they've got to come sometime, right?" whined Tinker. "They don't got to do anything." Neris spat out a worse than normal chunk of his ration bar. "They're protectors of the Empire, aren't they? The same as us. Only with all the magic powers." Neris waved a hand. "Supposedly. Wouldn't mind seeing some of them powers here." "We make do with what we can," Benson said coolly. They continued to eat. Tinker's latest dumb rumor affected them more than they let show. Benson had never seen one of these force-powered Imperial Jedi aside from the Emperor's holo broadcasts, where they lined up behind him in their fancy armor. Some people thought it was all for show. Others said they really did fight and used their magic for the Empire's good. Benson didn't know what to think. Seeing was believing, and unless he actually saw one of them, fat chance, he'd put them out of his mind. But some people couldn't let it go. Oragathan, a pale taciturn element and the squad soul alien, asked curiously, "How many Imperial Knights are there?" The humans all looked at each other, uncertain. Vivith ventured, "I heard around 100. "I thought it was lower," said Benson. "Say, a dozen. Fat odds we'll see one of 'em here." Then, dismissed Neris. "I was just sharing a rumor," Tinker sulked. "I didn't say I believed it." "Even a few might do us essential good," said Oragathan. "Assuming the rumors are true." Big assumption, muttered Neris, but nothing more. They chewed in silence for a while. Benson told himself, yet again, that he didn't care about seeing an Imperial Jedi. Didn't even care if they helped at Endex, not really. He just wanted this fight to be over. He wanted to move on to the next one. He wanted to see Entrala again. When he joined the Stormtrooper Academy at Beskane 4 years ago, none of this had been on the horizon. When the schism between Fel and Veers played out, he hadn't believed it was happening. Even now, a part of him refused to accept that his family was on the other side of the war. His parents and his parents' had all grown up on Entrala. They went back generations, to Artis Kane's day. His older brother, the one he'd always wanted to be like, had donned the white and been stationed at Yaga Minor, attached to one of the ships in Admiral Graves' Second Fleet, which now huddled in the Velkar sector at the core of the Restorationist forces. He had no idea if Nath was even alive, or what it was like for his parents on Entrala. He just hoped, prayed, that when Fel's armies took Veer's capital, they could finally reunite. Nobody had asked Benson what side of the fight he wanted to be on. He doubted they'd asked his parents or Nath either. Other people he only saw on holo broadcasts, drew the battle lines and sketched their fates. If any Imperial Jedi Knight, or whatever showed up, he'd ask them what gave them the right to set brother against brother like that. Not that he expected an answer. Not that he expected to see them. Chapter 2. When Night Watch reverted to real space over Endex, Vitor Fel was strapped into a drop ship which was in turn locked into his berth aboard the mammoth assault carrier's starboard hangar. From his position he couldn't see the rusty sphere below, nor the other warships that had laid siege to the world's orbital shipyards. He couldn't see the besieged Great Mesa, nor the fortress and high-powered defensive cannons that were their ultimate target. But he'd read the reports and seen the recordings. He conjured them in his mind's eye as the drop ship rattled around him, and a voice from the cockpit declared them greenlit for deployment. "Be sure to breathe, O Prince," Aiden Tori said under his breath. Vitor breathed. He needed the reminder. The drop ship rattled. He heard the scrape of the hangar claws releasing and the hum of the engines burning. Vitor and Tori were the lone Imperial Knights crammed into the ship. The rest of the seats contained dozens of stormtroopers in fresh suits of white armor. In the Force they were a brew of tension, impatience, fear, and bravery, but to his eyes they were a smooth, hard, impersonal mass, each one identical. How many were watching him through those black mirror visors? Did they see an Imperial prince, or just a gangling youth in ostentatious armor? He tried to put it out of his mind. He was afraid they'd be fired upon just approaching the planet, but Nightwatch's massive TIE fighter wing seemed to be keeping the enemy occupied. The drop ship shuddered through atmospheric entry but made no evasive maneuvers. Once the wind started howling outside, the flight became a smooth descent. There was a ping on the overhead comm system, and Tori began undoing the straps across his chest. "Let's see how that approach is going." Using handholds in the ceiling for stead, Tori walked down the center aisle of the hold toward the cockpit portal. Vitor followed and tried to forget the eyes of the stormtroopers on him. Tori opened the door and led them through, into the cramped cabin where 2 pilots directed the ship. "Approaching the shield barrier now, sirs," the pilot said. "If you're going to remain standing, please hold on to something." Both knights grabbed to the back of chairs and watched through the viewport. Red, dusty desert spread out beneath them. The drop ship continued its dive without relenting speed, and Vitor had a queasy feeling that they were going to smash dead into the dry earth. Then the pilot pulled the throttle back. The ship shifted direction, and Vitor's stomach lurched. Desert expanse panned down, and the sky, not blue but a pale cloudless gold, filled most of his vision. He'd been briefed aboard Night Watch and knew the battle plan. The drop ship was going to dive beneath the exterior rim of the shield dome, a perilous altitude of just 300 meters, then soar up again. The goal was to deploy directly to the highest secure tier of the Grand Mesa. The problem was determining exactly where that highest secure tier was in very limited time. The battle shifted hour by hour, and a single missile from the Mesa's high turrets could rip the whole dropship open. Vitor's stomach did another loop as the pilot pointed them skyward and accelerated, then leveled out again at a safe altitude beneath the invisible roof of the energy shield. The Grand Mesa, dozens of ascending tiers, 4 kilometers high and 10 across, was small but unmistakable ahead, a rupture in the endless flat desert. Sending signal, the pilot reported. Mission is go. Vitor heard a chime in the rear cabin, followed by the shifting of armored bodies readying for deployment. Hailing the ground troops now. The co-pilot tapped his control panel, then his earpiece. Vitor waited, eyes narrowed, peering at the mesa. It grew larger and he could make out the bristling shield generator and weapon emplacements atop the highest table. When the silence drew too long, Tori asked, Citra. They suggest south side, tier 8, or northwest side, tier 6. The co-pilot grimaced. Situation sticky everywhere. Suggestions. Was he asking what the Force wanted? The two knights looked at each other. With his eyes and a nudge of the Force, Tori asked if Vitor had any such guidance. Vitor shook his head. Take us to the south side, Tori said. Yes, sir, the pilot agreed, and tipped the dropship into a banking curve. Vitor gave the only knight a nudge in the Force, and a question. Tori's response was a minute shrug that seemed to say, when you don't know, guess. Tori had said that to survive, and win a battle you had to find its invisible flow and swim with it, just like you did with the Force. This seemed more like a cannonball jump into the deep end. Incoming missile, engaging shields, the pilot reported, then twisted his head halfway around. Sirs, you should be standing by to deploy. We may only get one shot at this. The only warning they got was the overhead pop of missiles bursting from anti-air batteries. It was just after dawn, and the 12/247th was still indulging what should have been nap time, though Nath couldn't sleep for his thoughts about Kranz. He twisted in his bedroll and sweat in his armor despite the chill, running through memories of their conversations over the past weeks. Kranz was from Gemus, Kranz had a mom who served on a Star Destroyer, Kranz had had a sort of girlfriend on Bastion before this war tore the Empire and his people apart. Would Nath survive to tell them what happened here? Would they even want to know he'd died so pointlessly, so randomly? But the sound of the missiles launching tore him from his worries. He sat up and watched, first morning sun on his cool face, as a trio of missiles shot away from the mesa and curved in the gold-tinted sky to track the distant dot of their airborne target. An alert alarm wailed. Suddenly Sergeant Rakaya stood above the 12/247th's tangled bedrolls, barking at them to prepare for an intrusion. Other squads, already stirred from rest, were manning tripod guns and readying rifles. Nath grabbed his 990 and squinted at the sky. He didn't see those missiles anymore, but that black dot was getting closer. Dropship, Conrad class, Popper said from beside him. Neither man had helmets on, but Popper held a pair of macro binoculars over his eyes. Shields held out against 2 missile hits. They've got to be battered, right? Asked Nath. Maybe we can knock him out before they deploy. Don't bet on it, said the man on his other side. Get ready for a fight. The one called Chopper had also earned his nickname. He was so big he couldn't fit into standard stormtrooper whites, and he kept a nasty-looked vibro sword at his belt for close-quarter fighting. It wasn't standard issue, but at this point nobody cared about that sort of thing. Once the dropship got close enough, it seemed to explode in size. The armored, ovoid craft still had shields up, and they absorbed an upward hail of small arms and artillery fire. Its belly-mounted cannons returned fire onto the stormtroopers below. Geysers of dirt and smoke exploded. Nath saw bodies go flying. He heard someone, maybe Sergeant Recchia, booming at them to stand firm, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of the dropship as it hovered directly above the encampment. Repulsors and hot air blew onto Nath's still exposed face. The belly cannon stopped, but bright lights flooded down and blinded him. Get back, he heard Chopper call from right beside him, then felt a powerful arm drag him away. They get 3 long steps before the sound of the dropship's repulsor ceased. Nath got 2 more strides in before he understood why. The dropship dropped. The powerful, heavy craft let itself fall 10 meters, directly onto the mostly flat mesa step. Restorationist troopers unlucky enough to be caught below and Nath would have been among them, were crushed instantly. Clouds and smoke and debris washed through the air. Before it settled, massive doors on the dropship's flanks ground open, and dozens of new stormtroopers, all in fresh, undamaged armor, poured out. Some restorationists stood their ground. They hurled grenades at the dropship or pivoted turret guns to spray its armored hull, and the troopers surging out of it. Nath, who dropped to one knee between Popper and Chopper and pumped shots from his 990, watched as the initial rush of traitorous troopers fell as though cut by a giant scythe. It was enough to give him a flash of hope. But the troopers kept coming. The dropship's top-mounted cannons sprayed into the restorationists and targeted the tripod cannons, taking them all out in under a minute. Some voices, Nath couldn't tell whose, it was all a bedlam, urged them to fall back. Then the real surprise came. As white armored bodies gushed out of the dropship, a single figure in red joined them. It seemed to surge over them, literally leaping over their heads to the crest of the expanding wave. This scarlet figure held something in one hand. It wasn't a blaster. It was something else, like a weird bright wand. The red-armored man completed his final leap, past his stormtroopers, and into the dissolving line of restorationist defenders. He swung his wand back and forth, and troopers after trooper fell, like the wand had burned right through them. That was when Nath's mind finally registered what he was seeing. It was a Jedi. He'd heard stories about them. Everyone had. Some said they were sinister baby-stealing wizards who'd made Davek Fel their puppet. Others said they were brave warriors who'd helped defend the Imperial space from the onslaught of alien invaders, though this opinion was never voiced aloud in Veer's empire. Nath, truth be told, hadn't known what to think. He never, deep down, really believed in them. What he did now, seeing was believing, and belief was terrifying. Nath didn't need to be told to fall back any longer. Not even caring what Popper and Chopper were doing, he ran. They'd put up another set of lifts on the nearest rising cliff face, which were already pushing off, overloaded with troopers and equipment making another fast retreat. Nath kept his head down as he ran toward them, praying they'd be sent back down for another load. Laser fire was everywhere. He'd never bothered to put on his helmet, and a set of bolts nearly scorched the hair on the back of his ducked low head. An explosion, and his burst of heat and concussive force, threw him onto his stomach. Nath rolled to avoid being trampled by another trooper, and pushed to his feet. He looked at the drop ship and saw fire, and smoke spilling from its hull, probably work of a grenade or shoulder-mounted missile. But it wasn't enough. The drop ship had disgorged most of its troops and its deadly Jedi. More shots were raining on them from above, and Nath saw air troopers, maybe sent from the lower tiers to enforce the new arrivals. The only way to survive was to run. The cliffside lifters were lowering. Nath scampered for them, barely bothers to hold onto his rifle. Lasers splashed everywhere. A stormtrooper on his right took a shot to the back and fell. Another, running ahead of him, lost the back of his head and collapsed, just like Kranz. Nath leaped over the body and kept on running, until he threw himself into the pile of stormtroopers on the nearest lift. The elevator creaked in protest of so much weight, but it still took them up. A few soldiers fired downward to cover their escape, but Nath wasn't one of them. A stray elbow of one of his comrades cracked the side of his unprotected skull. His world swam, his vision blurred. He barely had enough awareness to curse himself for not putting on his helmet. But when he looked below, he saw two luminous blades dancing through the crowd, slaughtering too many restorationists to count. Against such inhuman monsters, it didn't matter if he had a helmet or not. They were all doomed. By the time Benson got up to the newly taken tier, the fighting was over. The air was thick with smoke and dust, and dark clouds rose into the warming dawn light, but no more blasters were being fired. Even the restorationists who'd been chased to higher tiers were no longer shelling them. The scene was almost peaceful, except for the remnant carnage. The smoldering wreck of a massive Conrad-class dropship rested in the middle of the bare rock plain. The ground around it was littered with white armored bodies. They looked to Benson like the discarded shells of insects, but he knew inside each one was a corpse. There were dozens, even hundreds of them, and it was almost impossible to tell which had belonged to loyal Imperials and which to Veer's traitors. And Benson thought with a twisted stomach, it didn't really matter, did it? Not when they were dead. The others, thankfully, weren't so grim of mood. In fact, the soldiers seemed buoyed by the capture of another tier. They were only a few more levels away from the top of the mesa, which unfortunately might be the hardest fight of all. But spirits seemed high, and it took Benson a few minutes to find out why. They brought knights with them, explained Gaver, a weapons specialist from another squad. Two of them that I saw. They came out running and swinging, taking out the enemy left and right. He clasped his hands and swung them back and forth, as though wielding an energy sword himself. You mean a real Jedi? Actual real Jedi? Tinker crowed triumphantly. I told you. Didn't I tell you all? If there are Imperial Knights, where are they now? Asked Oragathan. I'm not sure. Meeting with the brass, probably. Gavar waved at a slanting tent, probably left by the Restorationists, now commandeered by the 401st Leadership. But they're here. I saw them. Gaver wandered back to his own unit after that, leaving Benson's squad to talk among themselves. Tinker was, naturally, proud to have been proven right, while Neris found a new mode of skepticism. Just cause they're here don't mean they can turn the tide, he said. After all, there's just two of them. Two seemed effective enough, Oragathan said, gesturing to all the fallen bodies. Cleanup crews were working. Some gathered the dead Restorationists, while others collected their fallen weapons and gear. In a fight like this, they scavenged anything they could get, even the armor of their dead enemies. A stormtrooper helmet was a stormtrooper helmet, no matter which side wore it. I'm pretty sure dropping the Kinrath on top of them helped too, Benson muttered. I'll take any help I can get, said Tinker. Jedi or whatever else. We will need it to end this fight. Oragathan looked upward at the next tall cliff they'd have to ascend. This was a big one, over 100 meters of sheer red rock. After that, if Benson's memory was correct, there'd only be 2 more tiers to climb before they hit the Grand Mesa's tabletop. That would be the hardest fight of all. The Restorationists would be sure to bunker down inside what was already a fortified facility. I hope Jedi are what they claim to be, Benson said, eyeing the cliffs. I guess we're going to find out. They'll come through for us, Tinker said with strained confidence. Just look around you. Benson did. He saw a scene of carnage. He knew these Jedi, Imperial Knights, he reminded himself, were supposed to be some kind of religious order. Some even claimed they had special mystic powers. What he saw was something much more simple, more primal. It was a slaughter. These 2 knights were super soldiers. There was nothing noble or glamorous about being a soldier. He'd found that out the hard way. It was a tiring, grueling, ugly business, and if these high-minded mystics were also soldiers, then they must be tired and ugly too. As long as they fought and won, and stayed on his side, he supposed he could accept them. His thoughts drifted to his older brother wherever he was. Has Nath ever battled these super soldiers? Had he ever seen one, even from a distance? So far Benson hadn't even accomplished that, and they were supposed to be on his side. If these weird mystics were miracle workers in addition to extra prolific killers, they'd find a way to end this war quickly and easily, so he could go home to Entrala and see his parents and brother again. But that, it seemed, was too mighty a thing to ask, even from an almighty knight. The goal had been to secure the landing tier, then meet the colonel in command of the 401st and plan the rest of the offensive. The first half was accomplished, but the second was impossible. The colonel had been killed by a mortar blast 2 tiers down. The unit's acting commander was Major Sayers, a veteran who moved with a slight limp after losing a leg at Gemus early in the war. I was just a sergeant then, he said as he settled into a canvas chair inside the flimsy command tent the Restorationists had used just hours ago. I never thought I'd rank up this fast. His tone dripped bitterness, and Vitor didn't know what to say. Aiden Tori, hands clasped in front of him as both knights stood in the tent, replied, "You will make colonel once we capture the fortress. We're here to make sure that happens." "Well, you've helped so far," Sayers replied, "but it's a long way to the top." Did more units deploy on the other cliffs? Tori shook his head. It was just too risky to send in more than one drop ship. So we're on our own? Lovely. Vitor spoke up. Don't you have ways to communicate with the other ground units? We lost our communicator at the same time we lost the colonel. We've been using signals flares to let the other teams know what tier we're on, but that's it. Our dropship took damage, but the communicator is still working, said Tori. You should be able to contact the other units with it. And, I hope, coordinate a joint assault on the top of the mesa. Sayers brightened. Why didn't you say so in the first place? Then he wilted. It will still be hard. You've seen the kind of attrition we've had. Almost half the 401st has been injured. Almost a quarter dead. A quarter. Why didn't your kind come sooner? We received our orders when we did, and we do what we're told. Tori spread his hands. We're not so different from you. You got nicer armor, the major deadpan. Tori ran his hands across his breastplate, tapping 3 different dents. It will look like all of yours soon enough. Only redder. More tempting to target. I suppose you are that, Sayers admitted. You have any brilliant ideas for taking the top of the mesa? Not at the moment. We've just arrived, and we need to review the current state of the battle. Sayers stood with a groan, then took a small portable projector from his utility belt and held it out. Review all you like. I'm going to take a look at that comm system, see if we can't let our comrades know that help's arrived. Tori took it with a nod. Sayers looked at him, then spared a longer glance at Vitor. The young prince did his best to meet the evaluative stare. Then Sayers walked out of the tent. When he pushed up the tan-colored entrance flap, Vitor saw a loose crowd of troopers, some with helmets, some not, clustered outside. When the flap went up and their CO came out, they all tried for a look inside the tent. But the flap fell down just as fast, leaving the 2 knights in relative isolation. Well, Tori said in a happy tone, that could have gone worse. It could have gone better, too. I thought we'd get a warmer welcome, Vitor admitted. Compared to how a company of stormtroopers used to treat our kind, these ones are warm and fuzzy. It was a reminder that Tori, while born on Bastion, had spent years traveling the galaxy and working with different Jedi. He was accomplished and respected, but some of the younger, more patriotic Imperial Knights whispered about his uncertain loyalties. Vitor decided to sound him out. I thought we are no longer Jedi, he said. Jedi is a word. Maybe an ideal. I have the Force. That's a truth beyond words or ideals. Fair enough, Vitor thought, but he didn't think that would convince the young patriots. Not that it mattered. Not here, with the weight of a battle pressing on their shoulders. He asked, what's on the disc? Tori tapped a button on the side. The holo that appeared before them showed the rising tiers of the Grand Mesa, along with colored lights marking the Imperial and Restorationist positions. The mesa was a colossal formation, and Vitor had to remind himself that each rising step meant 100 meters or more sheer rock face, hard to ascend but easy to defend. It was no wonder they'd been fighting for over a month with heavy casualties. Formidable, isn't it? Tori said. They want us to work miracles. And we can't disappoint them, can we? Vitor grimaced. We can't help with their assaults like we did just now, but I'm not sure what else is possible. That's because you haven't lost yourself in the flow of the battle, young prince. That metaphor, and the teasing tone, were starting to annoy him. And you have. No, but I'm getting there. Vitor scowled. The rush to take this tier of the mesa had been a whirlwind of violence, much of it aimed at him, but much dealt by him as well. Though it was just an hour ago, the whole experience seemed a blur now. Just like this first battle in the rain outside the Bastion Academy, he'd acted in a frantic rush, concerned only with staying alive and cutting down whoever tried to make him otherwise. If that was what fighting with the Force's flow looked like, he wasn't sure he wanted to master it. He said so. Tori tilted his head. What do you mean? Just what I said. Do you know how many people I killed today? I don't. That makes it worse. The older knight's face grew serious. There's more to winning a battle than killing your enemy. In fact, it's probably the least important part. To really know and flow with a battle, not just the physical violence, but flow in the Force, is to find the key to victory. Vitor held in a sigh. This vague, cryptic advice was too old-style Jedi for his liking. Imperial Knight stressed practical, attainable goals. He said, if the Force is telling you anything, that's more than it's telling me. So what do you have? Tori twisted his wrist, shifting the position of the holo so Vitor could view different sides. You can see the restorationists are deployed by cliffs above the attacking encampments. Naturally. Yes, but there's plenty of cliff faces they've left unguarded. Say, that one, and that one. He pointed with his other hand. They're not guarding them because those cliffs are almost impossible to climb up. They're too steep, too jagged, too tall, Vitor said, but he knew where this was going. Do they still take apprentice knights rock climbing in the Rampart Valley? Tori asked. They do. It wasn't my favorite, but I've done it. Rampart Valley's nothing. One time I had to scale the Gray Canyon on Exodo too. Brutal stuff, but if the Force flows with you, and you flow with the Force, you can sustain your energy all the way to the top. He pointed at the holo again. These cliffs aren't so bad, in comparison. In comparison? Vitor repeated. We should wait for cover of night. Naturally. And we should talk with Major Sires and the other company commanders. We need to explain our plan and assure them we can get it done, then help them plan their own coordinated offensives. Very good. Tori tapped off the holo and stuck it in a belt pouch. Leadership tips from your father. Yes, Vitor admitted. Smart man, our emperor, even if he doesn't have the Force. Tori threw in a wink. Come on, let's find Sires and let that ray of sunshine know what's up. Vitor looked at the tent flap. He could feel the crowd outside, restless and curious. He wondered how many of them had ever seen a Jedi, or Imperial Knight, in the flesh. Don't let him get to you, Tori said. If you want people to follow you, you have to be seen as a leader. That's what my father tells us. You have to be seen as separate from them, and above them. Well, he's the emperor. He would say that. And you? Vitor glanced at the man. You may be above them one day, Prince, but right now you're in the muck, getting dirty and bloody with the rest of them. He ran a finger across a scorch march on Vitor's left shoulder pad. That's what they need to see right now. Just a lowly mortal like them. Okay. Vitor exhaled and faced the tent flap. That should be easy then. Tori laughed, then put a hand on his back and roughly shoved him out to face his crowd. Nate kept his new helmet with him at all times. When he wasn't wearing it, he kept it clasped against his body with one hand. Wearing it was no pleasure. The anonymous fallen soldier he'd inherited it from must have had an intestinal disorder, because the inside of the thing smelled like a bantha passing gas. Miserable as that was, waiting for the Jedi monsters to come and kill them was worse. It was only after completing their retreat that they learned Sergeant Rakaya hadn't made it. Whether he'd been cut down by a laser blast or a Jedi laser sword, it didn't really matter. He was dead. The 12/247th was down to just 4 men now, with Corporal Quillick in charge. He still had his original helmet, and Nate suspected he kept it on so his remaining soldiers wouldn't see the fear in his eyes. Despite their losses, Popper and Chopper were adamant they could still win this battle. Just 2 Jedi landed, too, Popper insisted after they'd regrouped, resupplied, and laid down the latest layer of barricades to hold back the next onslaught. Give me a clear shot and I'll blast both of their bloody heads off. You can pop one head, growled Chopper. I want to get close, get it done by hand. He laid his ugly vibro sword on his lap and caressed it with a dirty gloved hand. Don't get too close, Nath warned. One of those laser swords will go right through yours. And this'll go right through their necks. Just one good swing is all I need. Popper and Chopper weren't optimistic. They were angry. Well, Nath was angry too. Angry at the Jedi, angry at Fel, hell, maybe even angry at Veers. The Restoration's leader and the Jedi puppet both blamed each other for starting this war. He wondered if they blamed each other for the thousands dead, the families divided. Night fell, anger simmered, and for the first time in days, Nate found himself thinking about his own family. Since the war started, he shared a few messages with his parents and even got to visit them once, on a too-brief shore leave, at Entrala. They'd been healthy and happy to see him, but older than he remembered. As for his brother, he had no idea whatsoever. Unknowing was the worst thing. Maybe Benson was fighting for Fel. After all, he'd been at the Beskane Academy when the war started. Maybe he'd been killed. During the first year, he'd entertained fantasies that his kid brother might appear one day to fight at his side, after bravely deserting the puppet emperor and sneaking across the battle lines. But that wasn't going to happen. Deep down, Nate didn't think Benson had the boldness for it. He could only see his kid brother as a kid, one who tagged after his older sibling and emulated him, but also whined for help with classes and bullies. Maybe he'd gotten stronger since then, but Nate could only picture him going along and doing what the big bosses told him to do, even if that was treason for a puppet emperor. Benson was a puppet too, puppeteered by the hands of history. But Nate probably was the same. He was twisting in his bedspread, ringing through thoughts of Benson, when he was torn from sleep by another enemy assault. This one surprised him. In fact, his initial thought was, this can't be happening. Not in a shock senseless way, but a rational one. The 12/247th had been relocated up to entire tiers, to a level that the traitors shouldn't have been able to touch. But they had. Explosions flashed and thundered in the night. They seemed to come from all sides. Nate kicked back his bedspread and made sure to shove on his foul-smelling, inherited helmet before he grabbed his rifle. "Where the hells are they?" he asked on the squad frequency. "Don't know," growled Chopper. "Hear that? They're attacking down level." Nate cautiously, bent low, scampered closer to the cliff edge. Some soldiers were on their bellies, firing down the steep drop. When he looked past them, he saw the tier below a mess of flashing explosions and chaotic blaster fire. But when he scanned the skies, he didn't see any air troopers attacking, and nobody was running fiber cables up to their level. More explosions, these ones from behind. Someone was attacking, not on a large scale, but enough to sow confusion across the 247. "What do we do?" He barked into his helmet. "Corporal. Orders." "Stand by," Quillick growled and said nothing more. Nate peered down the cliffside at the lower tier. He saw lots of laser bolts flashing chaotically, but no swinging, glowing laser swords. Wherever the Jedi were, they weren't down there. Which, logically, meant they were up here. "It's the Karkin Jedi," he growled, and stalked through the maze of moving troopers to Chopper and Popper. "It's got to the damn Jedi." "Probably, but where are they?" asked Popper. He had his ERC 990 clutched tight, finger on trigger, ready to shoot as soon as a lightsaber glowed to life. Then they heard more explosions, not on their tier, nor the one below, but the step 50-odd meters above. Chopper cursed, and they all looked up to see fires flash. If the enemy had gotten that far, they were one step away from the Mesa's highest tier, and the supposedly impregnable fortress. But the fortress had emptied all of its soldiers to fight the enemy siege. Many of those had already died amongst the Mesa's cliffs. Sergeant Recchia, while alive, had told them that the fortress wasn't actually that fortified in the first place, because the Mesa was supposed to be its own defense. Nate was starting to wonder if anything was impregnable, if anything was safe, when the damn Jedi came into play. For a moment he actually hoped Benson had stayed on Fel's side. At least then his little brother might receive the protection of those monsters, instead of their wrath. "New orders," Quillick told them. "We're falling back, all of us." "Another tier?" asked Nate. "2 tiers," Quillick almost growled. "Everyone's retreating to the fortress. We'll make our stand there." "Yeah, a last stand," grunted Chopper. "Those are orders," the corporal said, exasperated. "Now fall back." There seemed no other choice. More explosions sounded above. Stormtroopers were already cramming into lifts and riding them up the 50-meter cliff. Nate, Chopper, Popper, and Quillick, all that was left of the 12/247th, ran to join them. Benson didn't understand why they were attacking now or where the Imperial Knights had run off to instead of helping them take the next tier, but when the order came down, he did what he was told, like a soldier was supposed to. This time he came up in the second wave, reeled up by a fiber cable anchored in the side of the cliff. By the time he got onto the next tier, the restorationists were already falling back, but he spotted explosions on the level above as well. Was that the Knights at work? He hoped so, though he'd have also appreciated their help down here. He'd barely gotten a glimpse of them so far. He'd had to peer between rows of white shell helmets to get a look at them as they crossed from the flimsy command tent to the wrecked drop ship. It had only lasted a minute, but nearly every trooper close enough to see had stopped to watch them pass. He'd seen an older knight with dark skin and graying hair in the lead, following by a pale child. Yes, a child. That's what he'd seen to Benson, though they probably weren't that different in age. But the younger man had had the same wide-eyed look he remembered seeing in the mirror when the siege began. It felt like years ago. There'd been some chatter that the young one had been Vitor Fel, son of Vitor Fel, prince and heir to the imperial throne. Most people, Benson included, dismissed that. There was no way, they said, that the Karkin emperor would send his son into a grindhouse like this, and even if he did, there was no way the emperor to be would look so green. Still, Benson wished that green kid was with them now. The restorationists made a fighting retreat to the next highest tier, emphasis on fighting. Rows of stormtroopers threw up barricades and laid down covering fire. Comrades riding up in elevators tossed grenades at the attacking Imperials. In the darkness of the night, it was impossible to see the deadly little spheres arcing through the air. You only knew them when they exploded right next to you. And one of them did. 1 second Benson was running, then he was thrown off his feet. It felt like his entire body had been punched in the right side. He landed on his left, hard. His armor cracked, his ears rang, and his malfunctioning helmet blared static so loud he had to wrench the thing off. Big mistake. On his first breath he nearly choked for the smoke, the ash, the suffocating ozone tank of air roasted by blaster fire. He pushed himself to his knees and squinted through the chaos of darkness and strobing plasma burst. He saw the smoking crater to his right where the explosive had detonated, then made out the white shell body lying face up on the crater's edge. Cursing to himself, Benson scampered on hands and knees beneath sprays of laser fire. He barely remembered to grab his rifle before crawling to the prone body. Once he got close, he saw the armor was scorched black and cracked in many places. It was lying in a glinting liquid pool. Benson pulled off the trooper's helmet to reveal the distinct, crown-tipped head of Orogathan. The element's pale face was wrenched in pain, but he seemed to recognize Benson hovering over him. His eyes widened and his mouth opened to speak, but only blood spilled out. "Medic!" Benson shouted wildly. He grabbed one of Orogathan's hands and felt his comrade squeeze back, hard, desperate. He shouted again, but only another stormtrooper came. Tinker, helmet still on, dropped to his knees and looked over Orogathan. "We've got to do something," Benson wheezed. "Find a medic. Get him. Get something." Orogathan retched beneath them and coughed up more blood. Was element blood the same color as humans? Would a medic even know how to patch up an alien's insides? Benson had absolutely no idea. "It's too late," Tinker growled under his breath. "But we can't." "Yes, we can." Tinker leaned over Orogathan and touched his blood-smeared cheek with one hand. He bent close and said, "It's gonna be all right, buddy, you hear? It's gonna be all right." Orogathan's eyes widened. His face twisted in further pain. Benson looked at his knees and saw them surrounded by the spreading pool of blood. Then Tinker took out his sidearm, put it directly over the shattered center of Orogathan's breastplate, and squeezed the trigger. Over all the other noise of battle, you couldn't even distinguish the sound. Orogathan gave one final rattle. Then his agonized expression relaxed and his face went blank. Almost peaceful, if not for the blood still spilling from his mouth. Benson tried to remember what he knew about Orogathan. He never talked much. Some said element were naturally withdrawn like that. Benson had no idea if he was typical of his species or not. He didn't know about his family, what had driven him, an alien, after all, to enlist for stormtrooper training. Had he joined up before the Civil War began or after? Did it even matter now that he was dead? Benson just didn't know. It was all we could do, you understand, growled Tinker. Benson had never seen him like this. I understand, Benson admitted. Tinker forced himself to look away from the body and holster his pistol. Another grenade rocked the area, too far away to hurt them. He asked Benson, "Where's your helmet?" Benson looked frantically to the place where he'd been thrown. I don't know. I think it was damaged. Then this is yours now. Tinker picked up Orogathan's helmet by the rim and held it out. Benson stared for a moment. Then he took the helmet in both hands and laid it over his head. There was a faint, alien smell to it, but the view through Orogathan's visor was the same as his own. Come on, Tinker said, and put a hand on his shoulder. Still plenty fighting to do. Benson nodded. They rose together and charged back into the fray. Chapter 3. In the beginning, everything went according to plan. Using the Force to strengthen their tired muscles, Vitor and Tori made the long climb together up and across over 200 meters of jagged cliff face. They finally emerged on a flat slab of mesa unguarded by any restorationists. Under cover of darkness, they crept into enemy encampments, using the Force and the night to shield their presence, then began planting remote detonated charges in key areas. After seeding one camp, they ascended another cliff and planted more charges. Once that area, too, was sabotaged, and the bristling fortress atop the mesa tantalizingly close, the two knights began detonating their explosives. In concert, the other loyal stormtrooper companies took advantage of the restorationists' confusion and began to charge the mount from all sides. Everything went gone perfectly. But like Vitor's father and mother and grandmother had all told him, no battle plan survives a battle. Something always happens that you don't expect, and the best you can do is draw backup plans so you're not caught totally flat-footed. In this case, Vitor and Tori had agreed what to do if they were split apart during the course of the fighting. Each was to fall back, down however many tiers necessary, until they could regroup with friendly stormtrooper divisions. A sound plan in theory. However, when the enemy found them, Vitor and Tori had just detonated their last charge on the penultimate tier. They couldn't tell how they were spotted. All they knew was that laser blasts started flying their way and shouting stormtroopers were charging in their direction. The hail of laser fire broke them apart. Vitor dived to his left, Tori to his right. Both men had to sprint into the shadows and try to hide, but the area was swarming with enemies looking solely for them. Vitor thought he'd eluded them behind a pile of cargo crates, but he felt the alert soldiers closing in on him from all sides. He reached out for Tori and felt the other knight somewhere in the confusion, but couldn't tell where. He had to fight on his own. Vitor remained in shadows, crouching and waiting, heart pounding until the first soldier stepped into view. Then he lunged, igniting his saber mid-motion. The blade took the stormtrooper through the chest. He heard the woof of the man's last breath as their faces pressed close, then shoved the trooper aside and spun toward his comrades. What happened next was that ugly fugue state. Vitor flowed with the Force, and it flowed through him, and the flow was lethal. He cut down one trooper, snapped right to dodge a volley of bolts, stabbed through another soldier, and slashed away the third. It took 2 seconds, and no thought at all. He simply did it. It all happened effortlessly, like the Force had decreed he wasn't to die here. His display drew more attention. He heard shouts and felt approaching foes. Vitor ran once more, seeking new hiding places. The chaos of the battle grew thicker and louder. He was certain that friendly stormtroopers had mounted this tier. A glance at the elevators leading up to the mesa's crown showed them in motion, packed with more restorationists in retreat. The battle was tipping in their favor once more. Despite his fear and exhaustion, Vitor felt a wash of pride. Pride nearly killed him. He heard the faint clack of a metal object hitting the rock beneath his feet. Vitor grabbed the object with the Force and threw straight upward. The grenade's midair explosion pushed him to the ground. As he lay dazed on his stomach, he realized his lightsaber had spilled from his hand. He shoved himself to his knees, looked around, but couldn't spot it. Then 3 stormtroopers came into view. They moved to encircle him and kept their weapons trained on him. He could feel their lethal intent. Still on his knees, he opened his mouth and wondered what, if anything, he could say to these men. Then a hail of laser fire cut horizontally through the air. Vitor ducked. The 3 stormtroopers didn't, and they wilted under the bolts. As their blaster-scorched armored bodies clattered to the ground, Vitor sprung upright. 5 more stormtroopers were approaching, all with rifles cradled. The armor was identical, but he was certain these ones only wished to save, not harm him. To prove it, one trooper lowered his rifle in one hand and held out Davek's lightsaber with the other. "Thank you, soldier." Vitor took it. "Thank you very much." All 5 stormtroopers stared at him for a moment, seemingly uncertain. Then the one who'd handed off the lightsaber asked, "What are your orders, sir?" He wished Tori were here, but he supposed it didn't matter. Vitor looked at the last remaining cliff and the rising peaks of weapon and shield emplacements that crowned the Grand Mesa. "One more charge, and we can end it," he said. "We should try and disable the weapon emplacements first." "Very good," the trooper nodded, but Vitor sensed his hesitation. The man ventured, "Sir, are you him? Prince Fel?" He looked into the trooper's mirror-black visor and saw only a frazzled, exhausted youth, himself. "Call me Vitor," he said. The trooper nodded uncertainly. "Come on," Vitor pointed. "We've got some turbolaser batteries to knock out of commission." "This is it," Chopper said, voice scraping through his helmet. "End of the line." "Shut up," Nath told him. "Don't say that. Just being realistic." "I said." "Shut up, both of you," snapped Corporal Quillick. "They'll be coming through any second now." With effort, Nath forced attention away from the man beside him and stared across the barricade they'd hastily erected at the base of the Southwest Anti-Orbital Turbolaser Battery. It was as big a gun as anything Nath had ever seen. The cannon barrel must have been 5 meters thick. It rose like a tower 40 meters high, and it was pointed straight at the starry sky. It was the kind of heavy-duty weapon that could punch through the shields of all but the biggest capital ship, and it was no wonder Fel's traitors had been trying so hard to capture this redoubt. They'd almost finished their mission. Like an inexorable nightmare, they scaled the Great Mesa, tier by tier, until what remained of the restorationist forces were huddled around key sites. The remains of the 12/247th and 4 other squadrons peeked out from behind shoulder-high barricades, rifle barrels notched into crooks in the metal sheets, ready to unleash hell on the first thing to approach. They'd hold out for a while, Nath figured, but not forever. The battle was as good as lost. Maybe we should surrender, he thought. He didn't want to die for Veer's vision of empire. He didn't want to die at all. He didn't want to hand the empire over to Jedi and their puppet emperor either, but standing in the dark, waiting for death to come, he wanted only to be with his family on Entrala. Him, Benson, and their parents, magically reunited in a place of peace. That was what he wanted, and he didn't give a damn who ruled the empire, Veers, Fel, or a bloody Hutt for that matter. "The hell did you say?" Quillick's voice growled in his ear, and Nath realized he'd whispered that last thought aloud. He opened his mouth, breathed the rank smell of his helmet, and almost tried to argue his point, but Chopper said, "Leave him alone, Corporal. It's just nerves. We're soldiers of the true empire, and we don't surrender. Got that? Especially not to some Jedi filth," Quillick insisted, though Nath heard the waver in his voice, like he was arguing because he was supposed to, not because he cared. It just slipped out. "I'm sorry," Nath said, then wondered why he should apologize if he was saying what they were all thinking. It was Popper who said, with chilling severity, "We have orders to hold. We'll follow them. We don't do what we're told and the whole empire falls apart. Does anyone want that?" Nobody spoke, not even Quillick. They waited in tense silence. Nath didn't know for how long. They heard explosions and some flashes elsewhere on the mesa's top, but the fight wasn't coming to them yet. Nath wrapped a finger around the trigger of his 990 and prepared to squeeze the moment he saw anything. A new voice buzzed in Nath's helmet. "Hold steady, gents. We've got reports of inbound hostiles." That was the still-alive sergeant from one of the other squads defending the turbo laser. Nath didn't know his name. The man added, No matter what, they're not gonna take this battery from us. Love that optimism, boss, another soldier said. It's not optimism, the sergeant said severely. We've got 2 engineers inside. They just rigged the battery so if the traitors try to shut it down, it'll ignite the compressed gas tank underground. That would blow the top off half the mesa, Chopper said. Might be enough to take out those Karking Jedi at least, another soldier added. Nath would rather get out of this alive than see those 2 Jedi dead. He was about to say so, consequences be damned, when the sergeant declared incoming eastern flank. Nath and his squad were situated on the northern side. He shifted his rifle, still notched in a groove atop the metal barrier, and watched breathlessly as the first figures resolved out of the dark. Dents and scorch marks stole their smoothness, but the stormtroopers' armored suits still gleamed as they approached. The restorationists on the east side opened fire first. Nath shot next. With Popper and Chopper on either flank, he released sprays of red plasma bolts at the charging enemy. He didn't bother to aim carefully, he just added his bolts to the wild spray. The first rank of charging troopers fell, to his bolts or others, but more stormtroopers kept coming. A grenade went off just south of the battery, rocking the earth. The nameless sergeant urged them to keep firing. Then another grenade detonated, just north of the battery. The concussive force wrenched the barricades out of alignment. Suddenly, enemy stormtroopers were throwing themselves against the barriers and trying to mount them. Finally, Chopper cried. The big man dropped his ERC 990 and pulled the ugly vibro sword from his belt. He lifted it with 2 hands, positioned himself in front of the widening breach between 2 barrier plates, and when the first enemy stormtrooper broke through the gap, he took off the man's head with a brutal downward swing through the neck. Blood sprayed across Chopper's white armor and across Nath's. Nath thought he was going to be sick, but he hefted his rifle and tried to plug the gap with more bodies. There were so many sounds, blaster blasts, explosions, manic shouts, that he didn't hear the Jedi until the monster was on him. The figure seemed to fall from the sky. It dropped between Popper and Corporal Quillick and landed, knees bent into a half-crouch. For a fatal second, both men froze and stared. Then the red-armored figure stood. A bright light speared out from his right fist. Then the first swung, left, then right. Quillick fell first, Popper second, both of them with black scorch marks cleaving through their chests. Despite his shock, Nath moved. He hefted his rifle and unleashed 5 shots at the target, who stood just meters away. To his shock, the Jedi flicked his glowing sword in an easy weave, catching or deflecting each bolt. Then, with a howl, Chopper attacked him from the side. He held the bloody vibro sword over his head and swung down hard. The Jedi lunged, sidestepped, then flicked his wrist at waist level. Without any resistance, the blade cut Chopper in half. Nath watched in horror as his comrade's mighty body fell, 2 pieces tumbling in opposite directions. How could a man stand against such monsters? How could an empire? Yet when the Jedi turned to face him, the white glow of the lightsaber revealed a face. It was a young face, maybe even younger than Nath's. It was sweaty and dirty. The mouth was open, gasping for breath. The shadow-lined eyes were haunted. Not monstrous at all. But when the eyes locked on Nath, he remembered what this Jedi had just done. Screaming wordless anger for his slain friends, Nath raised his rifle. He fired, or tried to. The Jedi closed the gap between them in a second. The blaze of the lightsaber flashed in Nath's face. Everything was white, and then the deepest black. Stormtroopers crawled over bodies of stormtroopers, past broken barricades and into the turbolaser battery's control center. Benson's unit was the first to breach the building, and they found only 2 lightly armed engineers were inside. As soon as the hostile stormtroopers came inside, both men raised their pistols and fired. Corporal Vivith shot 1 dead, Tinker and Benson dropped the other man, with a combined volley. Then things were weirdly still. The sounds of the battle drifted in from outside, distant firefights and the occasional nearby rifle burst as troops from other squadrons took out the stragglers. It seemed such bleak work. As Tinker and Neris began to scour the battery's controls, Benson stared at the faces of the 2 dead engineers. Why didn't they surrender? He thought bleakly. They were Imperials, every one of them. Why did they fight and hate each other so much that thousands had died over the Grand Mesa? The remaining restorationists had to know they were beaten, but for some reason they'd insisted on fighting to the death rather than live in the empire Fel was creating. Was Nath like that, wherever his brother was? Or maybe he was overthinking it. Maybe they fought and died for the same reason Oraganath and others had. They were soldiers. They died as they were told, no matter who gave the orders. When the sounds of nearby violence ceased, a Jedi walked into the chamber. No, Benson corrected, not a Jedi. An Imperial Knight. More, an Imperial Prince. Vitor Fel was younger than Benson, probably, but his fighting prowess was astonishing. Benson finally accepted the power of these Force users. Seeing really was believing. "Battery secure, sir." Vivith snapped a salute. "Excellent," said the prince. "Can you shut it down?" Tinker, standing by one of the consoles, said, "I think we can take it from here, sir." "Good. We still need to bring down the other batteries and the shield generator. Can you men handle it here?" "We'll wrap things up," Vivith said. "Go ahead, sir." "Thank you," the prince said, and sketched an almost casual salute with his free hand. Then, clutching his magic sword in the other, the prince was gone. Everyone stared at the door through which he'd left. Nair said, "Unbloody believable." "I told you all this time," Tinker declared. "Didn't I tell you?" "You did," Benson admitted. "You were right." Nair sighed. "Can't believe he just ran out there. Off to the next fight." "I guess it's his job," said Benson. "Our job," clarified Vivith, "is to shut off this damn turbolaser battery. So let's get to it." They spread out, each man taking a certain console. Tinker had the most engineers training of the group, and he started giving orders. Benson had the console that controlled communication systems, and he began a total shutdown to prevent anyone outside from stopping the shutdown procedure. At the same time, Vivith killed the targeting system, and Tinker began to cool the main reactor. "Power output's decreasing," he reported. "The last fuel injector shut down. As long as the exhaust systems are working, closure should be smooth from here." "Great news," said Naris. "Now what?" "Now we hold," said Vivith, "just in case they try to retake the battery. Small chance of that if the Jedi, Imperial Knights, are out there," Benson said, smiling in relief. "Let him have the fight," Naris said. "I'm happy to hole up here where it's safe." Just the word, safe, sent a giddy jolt through Benson. After the awful bloody grind of this fight, after losing Oraganath and so many others, they'd actually made it. Fel's fleet would be able to take Endex, and then they'd move on to Entrala, where his parents were. Maybe, he dared to hope, they'd take the world without a big fight, and he'd even get to see Nath again. Then Tinker said, "We've got a problem." "What kind of problem?" asked Vivith. "Shutdown didn't work. The damn generator's starting up again. Fearfeck. The fuel injectors are going crazy." "Can't you kill them?" "I did kill them. I don't understand." Ow, stang it. "What's happening?" Benson rushed over to Tinker's side. The readouts on the console made no sense to him, while all the blaring lights couldn't be good. "We're looking at an overload," Tinker said. "It's gonna ignite the whole plasma store." Everyone else was frozen in horror, so Vivith made the snap decision. "All right, everybody's gotta fall out of here. Let's go, people, move. Gotta get away from here." Tinker, eyes transfixed on the console, swallowed hard. "No good? It's too powerful. We can't." The whole structure groaned, bucked, and trembled around them. A great rumbling built up from the earth below. Vivith sprinted for the exit and hurled himself through. Benson and Naris ran together. They collided before the threshold and, in pure panic, tried to shoulder past each other. The trembling grew fiercer, the roar below louder. Then the roar caught them. The earth shattered and the world was devoured by thunderous light. The battle for Endex didn't end with the capture of the Grand Mesa, but it did turn on it. The destruction of the Mesa's shield generator and powerful anti-orbital cannons left the shipyards above vulnerable. The waiting Imperial fleet moved in on the restorationist forces, who already knew that their straits were dire. They defended only as long as it took to evacuate key supplies and personnel from the orbital stations, after which they waged a fighting retreat. The restorationist ships to escape, which was most of them, were on a course for Entrala, where Veers was based. The next battle was already being planned, and it would be a hard one. Vitor Fel saw none of this. He was told about it later, aboard the carrier Night Watch, as he recovered from his injuries. He heard mostly from Aiden Tori. The elder Imperial Knight had escaped the fight largely unscathed. He'd been well clear of the turbolaser battery when it self-destructed. Vitor himself could have been killed. He'd certainly been close enough, less than 100 meters from the center of the colossal explosion. However, he felt a tremor of premonition shortly before the battery burst, and he'd taken cover behind another building. He suffered some burns and damaged eardrums, but overall, the force had been with him. Sometimes I almost felt like it was protecting me, Vitor explained to Tori later, in a private cabin. He'd voluntarily left his bed in sick bay, others had needed it more. Because you felt a warning, a premonition. I got one before. It was different than this, Vitor remembered. Before the attack on the academy, I dreamed about it. Then maybe the force is entrusting the future to you. That's a heavy responsibility. It seemed to Vitor that he had a lot of those. He wondered how much more responsibility he could take. Tori said, certain people receive certain gifts from the force. I knew a master, a very wise one, who was excellent in touching other beings' minds, but couldn't use telekinesis worth a damn. Personally, I've always been good at finding things. You mean missing objects? People. Places. Things. He smiled, but it looked tired. If I really focused on something, if I really wanted it, then the force would lead me to it. And I realized, eventually, that I had that talent for a purpose. I was given that gift for a reason, even if it took me a while to figure it out. What was the reason? The smile slanted. Tori's face gained a faintly mischievous shine. It doesn't matter now. I played my part and accomplished my mission. And that special talent of mine seems to have waned over the years. Maybe it's because I've gotten older. Maybe I did what I was supposed to, and that's all. I don't know. The force, if you haven't figured it out, moves in mysterious ways. Vitor had learned that bit a long time ago. It was something everybody, Imperial Knights, Jedi, probably even Sith, had to deal with. Am I supposed to safeguard the future? He asked. Or is the force safeguarding my future? I don't know. Do you think you were flowing with it, moving with it, like we talked about before? I guess I must have been. Vitor stared into the wall, frowning. I just did what I had to. I didn't even think. I just acted. That's good. The things I did weren't good. I killed a lot of people down there. To save more. But did I? Did I save them? He looked at Tori, imploring. The older knight frowned and stayed silent. He was old enough to know there were no easy answers. Vitor kept thinking about the stormtroopers inside the turbolaser battery, the ones he'd been with minutes before they died. He'd never known their names or seen their faces, but they'd known who he was and obeyed him without question. They may have even saved his life, but he'd been unable to save theirs. He'd asked Tori to see if he could find their names, but that was going to be difficult, if not impossible. The explosion had been so powerful that no human remains could be found at its center. Loyal stormtroopers and their restorationist foes, freshly slain and lying outside against their broken barricades, had been united by a final incineration. And they were just a handful. The death total for the Battle of Endex was going to be high. Thousands had died on the Grand Mesa alone. Entrala was going to be even worse, but Vitor would have to fight there too. It left him in a grim mood as he and Tori waited for new orders. He imagined they'd stick aboard Night Watch until being deployed at Entrala. He hoped more knights would come to help, but also hoped his brother would stay safe on Bastion. He was far too young for all of this, and Vitor prayed they could wrap up this war before Rome came of age. Night Watch lingered over Endex, and Vitor lingered aboard Night Watch. Then, 5 days after the battle, his father came. It was impossible for the self-proclaimed second emperor of the Fel dynasty to move without fanfare. When his shuttle landed in Nightwatch's smallest hangar, he was greeted by the captain, rows of stormtroopers, and 2 Imperial Knights in full red armor, cape included. The plasteel plates had been cleaned and polished since the fight. Even the dents had been knocked out. As good as new, at least on the outside. After receiving the necessary public adoration, Vitor Fel retreated to the captain's private cabin for a secure conference. Vitor waited outside and tried not to feel neglected. Thankfully, the parley was short. 5 minutes later, Vitor exited the room alone. "Vitor, with me," he said, barely glancing sideways as he passed his son. Vitor followed, uncertain what his father would say. He wondered if he'd disappointed him by taking injuries. His father wasn't a harsh man, but he had grown, distant since assuming the role of emperor. However, once they were alone in the cabin set aside for them, Dave spun, took his son by the shoulder pads, and scanned him up and down. "You look excellent," he judged, "for someone who got blown up last week." "I didn't get blown up," Vitor insisted with a relieved smile. "I was just knocked around a bit. I understand it was a close call. They say that turbolaser battery exploded and took off half the mesa. Maybe a quarter of the top level. After the explosion, the shield generator and all the other batteries lost power too. It ended the battle and made us pay an extra high price." Vitor shook his head and released his son. "You understand the kind of people we're dealing with. They could have surrendered at any point in the siege, but they didn't. They kept fighting, just to make sure as many of our people died as possible. Veers has crafted a movement that lives on spite, just as he does." Vitor frowned. "Maybe Veers does, but those soldiers were Imperials, just like ours. Until a few years ago they were all on the same side. They even felt the same, in the Force. Maybe in the Force they are. That's for you, your mother, and others to decide. I know, but it's what I felt." Vitor considered. "Your mother said fighting got much harder for her after she opened up to the Force. She became more aware of how much a life weighs and the cost of taking one. What about you?" Vitor wondered. His father wielded immense power, planets and armies, and fleets, but he didn't have the Force. Killing and sending men to die might become easy without it. Then he remembered the Sith. Killing could become easy with the Force as well. So maybe the Force didn't make much difference in the end. Vitor put one hand on his son's arm. "This was your first real campaign," he said. "We'll be moving on Entrala next. I haven't decided deployments yet, but I'm going to be using all my available resources. Entrala is Veer's capital. If we break him there, if we kill or capture him, we can end the restoration movement and end this war. But I won't order you to fight if you're not ready to go into the fray again." Vitor's memory raced through the events on the Grand Mesa, the horrible explosion of the turbolaser battery, the flash of warning from the Force that barely saved him, his awful entranced slaughter of Imperial soldiers whose greatest sin was taking orders from the wrong man. War was a brutal, ugly business, Civil War even more so. And yet, he also thought about the hope he'd seen on their naked faces when they crowded around to behold the tired, battered teenage boy who was also the Empire's prince and heir. He thought about the soldiers who saved him, and whom he failed to save in turn. The Empire was full of soldiers like that. They deserved better. Vitor lifted his head, met his father's eyes, and said, "I'll do it, Father. Of course I will." He expected to see pride. Instead, Vitor's face wavered. Then he forced a brave smile. "You're a good man. I'm sorry you have to go through all this. I'm sorry you didn't get a chance to grow up in more peaceful times. So on my butt I wouldn't be much of a Fel if I ran away, would I? No. Bravery's always run in the family. Just like duty." Vitor shifted his hand to cup Vitor's cheek. His palm scraped the young man's stubble, and his face wavered again. Even with the Force, Vitor couldn't tell what his father was thinking, but he caught something more bitter than sweet. Then Vitor pulled away. "Come on," he said, gesturing for the door. "Duty calls. It always does." Son and father stepped together out of the room.